A very good evening, friends. Today we are going to explore about shoulder girdle. Myself, Dr. Anshul Malhotra, NIS Patel. You know about different aspects of shoulder girdle. So the learning outcomes of this lecture will be: what is shoulder girdle? Number one. Then you will be understanding what are the bones which makes this shoulder girdle. What are the bony landmarks in shoulder girdles where different muscles attach, and what are the joints involved, what are the movements of shoulder girdle, what are the muscles involved, and what is the main purpose of shoulder girdle in our body. So starting with the lecture, so these are the learning outcomes. Now first of all, what is shoulder girdle? So just look at this picture. Basically these are the bones that attach each upper limb. Upper limb means your right arm and your left arm to the axial skeleton. So this is the basically this yellow portion. It has basically two bones, that is scapula. We also commonly called it as shoulder blade, and second one is clavicle. So this one is your scapula and this one is your clavicle. These two form shoulder girdle, and this is actually a system which attaches your humerus with your via this girdle to your axial skeleton. So this is the connection of your humerus or your shoulder joint via shoulder girdle to the axial skeleton. So it is a system that acts as a foundation, base of your shoulder joint, and for the efficient movements of humerus and shoulder joint. Like a building, if you have a strong base, your building will be very nice and very strong, right? Strong build. Similarly, if you have strong shoulder girdle, strong base, strong foundation, that will help you definitely to have good movements at this particular joint, that is your shoulder joint, and it is basically one of the joint which allows you a lot of movements in all the three degree of freedoms in all three planes. So it is multi-axial joint. So such a movable joint, you need some base, because at this point it is very weak. It is very mobile, but it is stable. It is not so good. So make it stable to work efficiently. We need strong shoulder girdle. So the main message of this slide is basically shoulder girdle is basically two bones, scapula and clavicle, which joins your humerus to the axial skeleton at your this breastbone sternum, right? Hope it is clear now. Now we'll go to the detail of bones of shoulder girdle. So the first bone I already told you, that is your scapula, and second one is your clavicle. So this red one is your clavicle from the both side. On the posterior side we have scapula. So I just make it very clear here. You can see that triangular portion posterior. So these two, this is our scapula, this is your clavicle. These two make shoulder girdle. Both move as a system. When clavicle moves, scapula moves, and the vice versa. And the clavicle is attached to sternum here. Here is the joint, and I will come to joints in detail. This is basically your SC joint, and here the whole, this is a prime movement joint. Every movement initiates here, and then clavicle moves, then your scapula moves, and then your humerus moves. So this is the prime, and the site is sternum. Clavicle articulates at sternum. So this is the clavicle. It is articulating at this portion, the breastbone, and is the only bony link to axial skeleton. So this is the only way this whole system is getting attached to your skeleton. So SC joint, and this is the joint where all movements initiate, right? Now what are the bony landmarks? So what are bony landmarks? These are the landmarks where actually the different muscles and will attach, and purpose of muscle is to do the movement of this shoulder girdle and provide stability with the help of ligaments and all that. So these are the bony landmarks where attachments will happen. So these are two diagrams of, you can see that. So this is your anterior photograph and this one is posterior. So just keep in mind. Okay. So this is just to help you locate where are the different things, where are the different location landmarks. So first of all, manubrium. So what is manubrium? So it is the upper portion of your breastbone. Here we have manubrium and we label it as 1 so that you can locate. So this is the portion where this clavicle, you can see that this is the clavicle. I put C over here, the bone right from here to here. So this is the where SC joint is. So clavicle meets our axial skeleton on the breastbone on the top portion, which is known as manubrium. So manubrium is the point of attachment where clavicle meets. Then we have clavicle. This is your clavicle. So I label it as number 2 for your clarity. So number 1 manubrium. Now number 2 clavicle. Now what is coracoid process? Number 3. So this is the process on the scapula. And here you can see the protrusion and I will label it as number 3. So this protrusion on the lateral side on the top. So this is your superior, this is superior. So here it is, this one, this shade, the portion I am shading, this is your, this protrusion is known as coracoid process. Now what is acromion process? So acromion process is behind this, posterior to your coracoid process on the posterior side. So just focus on the posterior side and here you will get, you can see here, this is your acromion process. So I'll put 4 here. So I'll shade it so that you can understand where it is. This is your acromion process. And this is the place where clavicle again meets scapula and this is known as AC joint. So I'll come to joints. So I'm just giving you the location. So again, this is clavicle, which is meeting here on the other side, lateral side, right? So this is your acromion process. Now 5 is glenoid fossa. So basically it is a cavity. Here it is. I'll put number 5 and here is the arrow. So it is covered by these ligaments. Here we have depression where this humerus, this is our humerus and this is the humeral head. This is the place where humerus attaches with your scapula and this number 5 depression or cavity is known as glenoid fossa. So glenoid fossa is the point of attachment of your humerus head. Then lateral border. Lateral means away from the midline. So this is the midline if you see posteriorly. So this portion away from the midline, this is your lateral. So I'll label it as 6. And then we have inferior angle in the bottom of the scapula here. This is your number 7 inferior angle. Then medial border, which is towards the midline. So this is the midline and this is the portion which is towards that. So this is labeled as number 8. Okay. And the number 9 is spine of scapula. Posterior we have some protrusion. So this protrusion, whole protrusion up to acromion process of scapula is known as spine of the scapula and we put it as number 9. So you just go through this video again and again, you will understand. So these are the locations where muscles and whole process takes place. I hope it is very clear. In one go you will not slowly if you see 2 or 3 times, definitely with these markings you will understand. Okay. So these are the bony landmarks of your shoulder girdle. Now for more clarity, I have just put this model so that it becomes more clear to you. I will just repeat all those which I have just labeled right now. So this is the model part and we are looking it as anterior portion. That means this is your left arm, and this is your humerus, and this is your humerus head. I'll put HH, right? Now this humeral head is attached to your scapula. So I'll start with the scapula first. This is the whole scapula behind the rib cage, and this is your clavicle, right? Now this clavicle will meet, here we'll have skeleton, right? Sternum here. So this will meet breastbone here, and this joint is known as SC joint, right? I have just described before, same I'm repeating it so that you can understand. And on the other side, lateral side, behind posterior, we have this portion on the top. It is acromion process, and here again clavicle will meet. So on one side it is interacting with your breastbone, on the other side it is interacting with your scapula on the acromion process, and here we call this fusion as AC joint. So the prime joint where whole motion, whole movements happen is your SC joint, and this is the point. SC joint is the only bony link with your axial skeleton, which I have told you earlier too. So okay, this is clear. Now this is your inferior angle, and now when we are looking at, this is your left hand, so middle line will be over here. So towards the midline is your medial border. This is your medial border, and this is your lateral border away from the midline, right? And where it is interacting, this humerus is your glenohumeral joint, which is the ball and socket joint where whole movements happen. So this joint is where maximum movement is there, and it is a ball and socket joint, and socket is provided by your glenoid fossa, that cavity. So below these we have glenoid fossa where this humeral head will interact, and you will have all the movement, and this is stabilized by these ligaments. And this protrusion on the anterior side is your coracoid process. So I have repeated all those things which I have labeled earlier in the last slide, so for the better clarity. So this is the main thing, main bony locations, right? And if you see posteriorly, we have protrusion that will your spine of the scapula. So this is your scapula, this is your clavicle, this is your humerus, and all the bony locations. I hope it is clear. Now we'll focus on the joints, right? So joints are what? Fusion of the bones where bone meets, right? And movements happen. Some allow a lot of movement, some don't. So basically shoulder girdle is made up of 4 joints. I have already discussed with you, so now I'm going in detail. So the first joint is your sternoclavicular joint. We call it as SC joint, and this is the prime joint where whole movement will happen. And here it is, just focus. Again, this is sternum, our breastbone, and this is the clavicle, and here they are meeting. So this particular joint where I am shading is your SC joint, and this is the prime joint where whole movement will happen with respect to scapula. Okay. So when this moves upwards, this clavicle moves upward, then whole that scapula which is behind will also move, and in this way you will see how these movements coordinate. I'll let you know. So basically this is a socket for this humerus in one line. So when you want to move your arm above 90 degree, so you will raise your arm. So when you raise your arm, this scapula will also raise, so that it can provide you good foundation, because this glomerular head will move only in this glenoid fossa, the socket. So as the head moves, socket also moves, and the socket is moved by muscles of this girdle. So that's why it is very important to stabilize your shoulder girdle. So I'll come to detail in the movement part. So right now we are just focusing on the joints. So the first joint and prime joint where a movement will happen is your SC joint. Clavicle joins sternum. So I have given you so that you can understand. So this is the area. Now second is your AC joint, which is known as acromioclavicular joint. So that means acromion process and the clavicle. So joint names are like that. They tell you what they are doing. Earlier we have sternoclavicular, that means sternum and clavicle are meeting. Now we have acromioclavicular joint, that means acromion process. Here it is acromion process, and here is the clavicle, and this is the fusion, and this is known as acromioclavicular joint. Sorry. So this is the second joint. So this basically assists it provides some rotation, some gliding movements over here. But prime movements will happen on the AC joint. AC joint will assist. Okay. So this is your AC joint. Then we have a scapulothoracic joint. So this is basically junction between the anterior surface of the scapula and the thoracic cage. So this is not a proper joint. It is just basically a junction. So how it is, this is your rib cage, you can see that, and behind that this is the anterior portion of scapula, you can see that. So it glides over that, right, and it is parallel to the thoracic part of your spine. So that's why we call it as a scapulothoracic joint. So it helps in the rotation of your scapula. Scapula will move upward rotation like this, hold this triangular shape will move up, then it will go down. So all these rotation, upward rotation, downward rotation of the scapula, which will happen over this rib cage, will be assisted by your this scapulothoracic joint. Here is the where this fusion happens and this movement happens. And the last one is one of the most mobile joint is your glenohumeral joint. So this is the glenohumeral joint where this humeral head will meet your glenoid fossa on the scapula, and this is ball and socket. Glenoid fossa is socket, and this is the humerus head is your ball. So this is the most mobile joint. And however, this fossa, this cavity is not so deep. So because it is not so deep, so it is very delicate. It is not so stable, but it is very mobile. It allows a lot of range of motion. But one key thing always keep in mind: the muscles for this joint are altogether different, and the muscles of shoulder girdle, which we are discussing, altogether are different. And one thing more, if this shoulder girdle is not able to move properly, is not moving properly, you cannot get full range of motion at shoulder joint, because this is the socket. When you go beyond 90 degree, I'll discuss that, socket has to move, and if socket doesn't move, your shoulder joint cannot give you full range of motion. So in simple line, this your shoulder girdle enhances your range of motion at shoulder joint, right? So this is a whole system. Shoulder girdle is a foundation. It is a system which helps your shoulder joint to move in all the three directions with a greater degree of range of motion. So that is the point. So these are the four joints. Once again, SC joint where clavicle meets your breastbone sternum, and this is the primary joint where actual arm movement will happen, and this is the prime joint and the bony link, only bony link with your axial skeleton, because rest all are attaching with one another, but this is the only one which is attaching this your girdle and whole system with your skeleton. Number one. Number two is your AC joint, which is acromion process and clavicle. Third one is scapulothoracic joint. We call it as joint, but it's not a true joint because there is no any synovial feature and all that. But here we have some parallel movements with the thoracic, so that's why we call it as scapulothoracic joint. And last one is your glenohumeral joint, and is one of the most mobile joint, ball and socket type, and it is here, and it allows a lot of movement, but it needs shoulder girdle for the full range of motion. Otherwise, it can't have full range of motion. So these are all four joints. Now coming to the movements now I'll cover movement at each joint. So first of all, movement at SC joint. So basically, SC joint is here. You know that this is your sternum, and this is your clavicle, and here we meet, and here we have SC joint, right? Now, what are the movements which this joint allows, or at this joint happens? So it is a prime. I have told you it is a prime connection of your whole shoulder girdle with your axial skeleton. So first one is your protection when it moves anteriorly to the 15 degree. So anterior means front way. See, like this. So when you pick something by completely flexing your arms in the sagittal plane, you want to hold something, right? So in that case, this clavicle will move at this joint up to 15 degrees, and technically we call it as protection, right? Because when this will move, so this is beyond, you have your scapula behind which is attached. So when this will move this way, scapula will also move, right? In this way, 15 degree, because all these are attached. When scapula moves, when clavicle moves, scapula also moves, right? So this is protection. So what is protection? So here we have midline, right? So when clavicle move anteriorly towards front, so this is attached to this one, so it will go away from that midline. So this is basically, when we go away from the midline, this is basically abduction, right? On the other hand, when this moves posteriorly, clavicle, then scapula will be moving towards the midline, and when it moves towards the midlines, that is it. Technically we call it as retraction, and it is basically adduction towards the midline. So this is all system connected. When clavicle move front, we have protection. When clavicle move posteriorly, we have retraction. And when we elevate our basically clavicle on the upside, right? So that is known as elevation, and this is around 45 degree. And when we depress our clavicle and move downward, that is your 5 degree range, and this is known as depression. So the four main movements: protection, retraction, elevation, and depression happen. That's SC joint. So basically clavicle will move, and when clavicle move, whole system is attached, so your scapula will also move accordingly. Okay. Now what are the ligament supports? Ligaments basically stabilize your joints, right? You need them. So what are the main ligaments that support your SC joint? So first one is your anterior SC ligament. So here you can say that this portion, anteriorly it will connect, right? Posterior SC ligament, similarly on the behind we have. So basically these are, just imagine this is the left side. Sorry, if you see looking at the from the anterior side, this is the right hand of the person. This is the left hand. This is right clavicle, right? This is your left clavicle, and here we have all rib cage. Just imagine like that, you will understand. And here we have breastbone, where from here this hole is the sternum, where this your right clavicle, left clavicle is attaching, right? So this is right clavicle, this is left clavicle. Here we have right scapula, here we have left scapula, right? So here we have our humerus. So just I am making clear so that you can understand. Here we have again humerus of the left arm. Now, so what is your anterior SC ligament on the front side? So this one. So this ligament on the front side, which is stabilizing clavicle and this joint, is known as anterior SC ligament. Similarly, we have on the back side. So these are like tapes, you know, they are stabilizing, holding them and making them stronger. So this is posterior. Then we have interclavicular, means tape between these two clavicles, both, so that they remain stable. And we have costoclavicular also. So this one behind this. So in this way, these are the attachments so that your SC joint becomes stable, and these are must. Okay. Now movement of the AC joint. So once again, what is the AC joint? So basically, clavicle meets acromion process. So this is your scapula, this is your humeral head, this is your humerus. So glenoid fossa, ball and socket joint here, and scapula, and this is your coracoid process, and here is a behind posterior on the top your acromion process, and clavicle is meeting here. So this joint is your AC joint. So as you told you that main movement happen at the SC joint, which is on like this side with sternum, but at AC joint we have some assisting movements, and we call it as gliding movements, acting like a strut to help with movement of the scapula, resulting in the greater degree of arm rotation. So when clavicle will move at this end, this joint will help to move scapula, right? That I told you just if the clavicle is moving upwards, right? So this joint will help to move scapula upwards, right? So in the protection, retraction, all those movements, this joint will assist the movement at SC joint, so that your whole system will move. So when this scapula will move, our socket is moving, and that is providing base for your humeral lift, right? So how these are all coordinated, I'll let you know in the next slide when we talk about purely about the movements, right? So this is all about your movements at the AC joint, and again we also require ligament support for the stability here. So here we have again, this is your humerus head, and this is the cavity and the lumbrum, so that this will provide stability feature, right? The cartilage, and this is your glenoid fossa, scapula, inferior angle, and again here we have sternum. I'm repeating this so that you can understand. So here we again sternum, clavicle joint. This is here we have SC joint, and here we have AC joint. This is the clavicle, this is acromion process. Now this is the portion where a lot of injuries has been seen in the sports, because this get affected by push or pull very easily. There are not so much problems at this joint, very rare. Most of the injuries happen at AC joints because it is on the lateral side and more sensitive position, and we have these ligaments breakage at this very often, very. So we have these ligament support. First one is your superior acromioclavicular ligament. Superior means on the top. So this is your, and they have shown you the injury. So this is very common injury we have seen. Okay. Then we have inferior on the bottom side, and this is your acromion process, this is your clavicle, and this is the ligament. This is on the superior side. We have one on the inferior also. Then we have coracoclavicular ligament. So this one which attaches this one to this one. This also sometimes get injured, and AC joint is the one where a lot of injuries have been reported, that I have told you, because it is on the lateral side and it is on the more sensitive position. Push or pull happens on this portion basically. So that's why we have a lot of injuries on this joint and these ligaments. So this is all about ligament support to the AC joint. Now movement at the scapulothoracic joint, and it is also known as scapulothoracic rhythm, because scapula glides over, moves with your rib cage parallel to the thoracic part of the lumbar. So that's why. So because of the mobility of the sternoclavicular joint like SC joint, and to a lesser extent the AC joint, the scapula can undergo several movements upon the thorax, right? So main movements which happen at this is your upward rotation, just focus on this, and downward rotation, this way, upward rotation, downward rotation. So that's why this you have, this is the dotted one. So here it has gone upward and here it has gone downward, and this movement will happen when you rotate your arm, and only aim and only objective is to provide proper positioning of the socket to your humeral head, so that movement can be happen effectively. If these movement doesn't happen, you can't raise your arm beyond 90 degrees. So to provide support, to provide socket to your humerus, these kind of movements happen. So mainly movements happening at the scapulothoracic joint is your upward rotation, downward rotation, elevation and depression, right? So abduction, adduction I already discussed in the SG joint. So when it moves anteriorly or posteriorly, this is your clavicle. So when it's moved anteriorly, we have abduction. When it moves posteriorly, we have adduction, because whole scapula will be moving. So all these movement, again, it is a repetition: elevation, depression, abduction, adduction, that is retraction, protection, and upward rotation and downward rotation. So this is again helping to move whole system to provide stronger base to your humerus. So this is all the movements at scapulothoracic joint. Now support to the scapulothoracic joint. So this is not a true joint, I have told you. So there is no ligament support. It is supported dynamically by the muscles attached. So the muscle which we'll be talking about in the later slide, there are 5 or 6 muscles which basically make this movement possible, and this joint has support of those muscles only. So there is no ligament support on your scapulothoracic joint. Okay. Now fourth one is your glenohumeral joint, and that is separate chapter, because that is a ball and socket joint, and a lot of movement will happen on that one. So that is not a part of shoulder girdle. That is just the attachment to that. So that is the whole chapter. So I'm not going to discuss movements of shoulder joint. Now I'm coming to the main movements. Now you will relate all those which I have discussed earlier. The movement at the SC joint, movement at AC joint, movement at the scapulothoracic joint. So how these are basically. So these are the movement which happen with shoulder girdle. So first one is your elevation. So when you raise your shoulder like this, right? You often do. So this is your basically elevation part. Upward. Okay. So movement will start at SC joint, then AC joint will assist, and again your scapulothoracic joint will also help, and all these will lead to the upward movement of your scapula. Similarly, depression, opposite of elevation is depression. Everything will go down. Now this is important, retraction. So you often see in this posture, when you do some stretching kind of thing posteriorly, you do like this, you retract basically. So when you retract, this is your midline. So your scapula is going towards that midline. So when you go towards midline, that is adduction. So this is your retraction. On the other hand, when you pick something and rotate, like a very good example I'll give you here, protection, retraction. So you have seen the barbell, right? We have weights here, just focus on that. So if you hold the barbell very closely, like your hands are at this position, ideally they should be here or here, but when you are holding it very closely, what will happen? You are basically moving your clavicle anteriorly. So when clavicle will move anteriorly, because you are making your hand posture like this, you are very close. So that will move scapula too away from the midline. Right? Okay. This one this way, this one this way. Why this is happening? Because your clavicle is moving anteriorly. Why? Because you have, suppose these are the hands, you have kept your hand very close to each other on the barbell. I'm again making the rod like this, right? So this is your abduction away from the midline, and technically we call it as protection. On the other hand, if you are at the proper position, you keep one hand here away proper, so that scapula becomes at the proper position, then you can do it very nice way. So this is the way we pinpoint the things. So that if the guy is holding the barbell very closely, so that means he is doing a lot of protection, and that is not a good posture. So we'll ask him to keep his arms wider so that scapula becomes stabilized at the proper posture, so that you can do good shoulder presses or whatever you want to do. So this is your adduction and abduction. So adduction is retraction, that means posterior movement of clavicle, and scapula will be towards the midline. On the other hand, protection is again moving away from the midline, that is adduction, right? So now last one, upward rotation and downward rotation. So with only shoulder joint, you can raise your arm if you are doing abduction, or if you are doing, you can go up to 90 degree, right? Or if you are flexing your arm, you can go up to 90 degree. When you want to raise your arm beyond this, here we have this, then you need to move your this socket. This socket should also move upwards, so that it should also rotate, so that it can provide the foundation to your humeral head. So that is your upward rotation. So when you, so this is here the range of motion will enhance. If scapula doesn't move, you cannot make any movement without beyond 90 degree, because this is the stable position. Above that, you have to move your scapula, shoulder girdle, so that this socket is there for your humerus head. So you need to do that. So this is your upward rotation. Similarly, when you do the downward, again this scapula will move downward, so that it can provide you the socket at the proper point, right? So these are the main movements of the shoulder girdle. Now coming to the muscles, shoulder girdle muscles. So muscles stabilize and help shoulder girdle movement for stronger base foundation for efficient shoulder joint movements. So now you have understood that if shoulder girdle is strong, with the help of muscles, you have to target these muscles so that it becomes strong. So you have strong foundation that will help you efficient shoulder joint movements. There are 5 or 6 main muscles. I'll discuss them one by one. All originate at axial skeleton and insert on the scapula or clavicle, right? One thing always keep in mind, the muscles associated with shoulder girdle are not attached to humerus at all. Humerus have altogether different set of muscles, right? So these are separate system. So these muscles are essentially providing dynamic stability of the scapula, so it can serve as a relative base of support for shoulder joint activities such as throwing, batting, blocking, lifting. So any movement which you want to make with your shoulder joint in different planes, you need shoulder girdle for the proper positioning of the socket, so that ball and socket joint can move. I hope this point has been clear now, right? Now we have basically muscles. So these are the main muscles: trapezius, rhomboid, levator scapulae, serratus anterior, pectoralis minor, and subclavius. So all these muscles you should focus to stabilize your shoulder girdle, so that you can provide strong foundation to your, sorry for my handwriting, to your shoulder joint. Okay, so I'll discuss one by one all three. So first one is your trapezius. We have 3 parts. Some books also say 4, but most of the time it is 3 parts. Upper one, traps 1, middle one, traps 2, and lower one is your traps 3. So this is your 1, this is your 2, and this is your 3. So traps 1, upper one will elevate and do the extension of your head. This one. So this one will not concern with the shoulder girdle, so we will not discuss here. The middle one is the one which will do this one, the middle one. So when this one help in the upper rotation, elevation, and adduction of scapula, because when they are going to contract, so we have scapula here. So when they are going to contract, definitely they will help the upward rotation of the scapula, also they do adduction, because you can see the fibers are like this. So when they contract, their main force vector is towards, this is the midline, so they will do adduction of the scapula. So this is your middle one. Now the lower one, these were again when they see the fibers again towards the midline, they will do adduction of the scapula, upper rotation again. And one thing they will do, because they are on the lower side, they will help in the depression phase of the scapula. So these are your trapezius, and all these muscles are posterior. Okay. Now rhomboids, deeper to the trapezius we have rhomboids. So these are major, minor rhomboids posterior. This is the scapula, and the action they do adduction. Again, you can see the force vector fibers are towards the midline. This is the midline. They'll do adduction, and when they contract, they help in the assisting in the downward rotation. Means they will rotate it downward, and also assist in the elevation of the scapula. So these are the rhomboids. Then we have levator scapulae. Again, this is the posterior one, and main action is elevation of your, because when it's contracted, it will do the elevation, upward movement of your scapula. Again, it is posterior. Then we have serratus anterior. So it is on the front side also, and the anterior side also, and little bit of the lateral side of the rib cage. You can see that. And the action is your abduction away from the midline and upward rotation of the scapula. So these are your serratus anterior. And then we have another muscle on the pectoral, on the anterior side is your pectoralis minor, this one. And again, this will also do the abduction. When it will contract, you can see the fibers will go like this away from the midline. So they will basically do the abduction part. So abduction means your protection and downward rotation of the scapula and depression of the scapula, right? Movement downward. And subclavius muscle, this is very short muscle on the superior part, and main purpose is stabilization and protection of your SC joint, and also assist in to some extent in the depression and the abduction away from the midline, like this, right? So these are the main muscles. Now the last slide. So what is the purpose of the shoulder girdle? In 3 lines, the whole summary of this. So shoulder girdle is a system that acts as a base of support for the efficient shoulder joint movements. Number 1, for proper and efficient shoulder joint movement, we must make it stable and strong by focusing on the shoulder girdle muscles. So we must work out on these 5 or 6 muscles so that we can make our foundation strong. So our foundation for the shoulder is your shoulder girdle. So make it strong, focus on the exercises which make this girdle strong, so that your shoulder movements becomes more efficient, and in this way you can enhance your performance and prevent injury. And this is the main aim of biomechanics, that we want to enhance your performance and decrease chances of injury. And if you focus on these shoulder girdle exercise, I'll discuss in the next video lecture, you will definitely make stronger foundation for your shoulder joint. Thank you very much.